with Olivia standing motionless at the door and Aaron, her stepbrother's best friend, perched on the side of the bed. The dim glow of the hallway streamed into the dimly lit guest room. There was strain in his low voice. "I can't stop thinking about you, but you don't have to say anything." The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, and she gasped as his penetrating stare met hers. Olivia already had to deal with tricky family relationships without her stepbrother Ethan's friends being around all the time. Aaron, however, was not your typical pal. Something about his sharp wit and quiet assurance stood out to her from the first time she met him. Olivia was always treated with kindness by Aaron, who saw her as more than merely Ethan's younger stepsister. However, as time went on and they both grew older, their relationships became more nuanced, multi-layered, and infused with an energy that neither of them wanted to admit. Things didn't start to change until Ethan asked Aaron to stay over during a family vacation. As Olivia's family got ready for a week of celebrations, the vacation home was a hive of activity. Aaron was late, but he welcomed everyone with his typical elegance, his tall frame filling the entryway. "Are you still using Aaron time?" Ethan gave him a back pat while teasing him. Aaron laughed, his eyes straying one too many times to Olivia. With his smile, as effortless as ever, he answered, "You know me." Olivia's cheeks flushed as she hurriedly got to work laying the table. The sensation of his eyes on her, a silent intensity that sent chills down her spine, persisted throughout the evening. Olivia couldn't sleep and ended up in the kitchen later that evening after everyone else had gone to bed. She sensed footsteps behind her as she poured herself a drink of water. "Had trouble sleeping, too?" Aaron's tone was quiet, almost apprehensive. When she turned around, she saw him standing in the doorway with his arms crossed but his face grave. "Too much coffee," she said, grinning slightly. He approached her and leaned against the counter next to her. "It's too quiet here at night. It seems like something from a scary film." The tension in the room was relieved when Olivia giggled. "Perhaps I should be the one who is afraid." Aaron's smile dimmed as he continued to stare at her. "Olivia, I don't think you have anything to fear." His low, methodical voice made her breath catch as he whispered her name. For a minute, they stood silent, the weight of the unsaid weighing on them. Aaron finally broke the silence. With a serious tone, he asked, "Can I be honest with you?" Olivia's heart was racing as she scowled. "How about?" He ran a hand through his hair and hesitated. "About how difficult it has been to be in your presence and keep my thoughts to myself. What I've been considering for a while." As his words took hold, her stomach turned over. "Aaron," in a hurried, frustrated voice, he continued, "I know it's wrong. Even though you are Ethan's stepsister, you are still his sister. It doesn't alter my feelings." Olivia's mind was racing as she gazed at him. "What are you saying?" He looked directly into her eyes and said, "I can't keep pretending I don't feel something for you." She stepped back, wanting time to absorb what he had just spoken, her heart pounding. "This is crazy, Aaron," she said. "Perhaps," he said, taking a step forward. "But that's the reality." He extended his hand and touched hers before she could reply. She was shivering from the warmth of his contact and was unable to resist pulling away. She whispered, "This can't happen," but her voice lacked conviction. He looked into her eyes and replied, "Then tell me to stop." "And I will." She was about to say something, but she was unable to do so. Rather, she stood motionless as Aaron drew closer and kissed her slowly, purposefully, and with a lot of unspoken desire. As the tension between them bubbled over, their restraint broke down and the kiss intensified. Olivia's fingers became caught in Aaron's hair as his hands moved to her waist, drawing her in. She said against his lips, her voice shaking, "You're impossible." He answered in a passionate voice, "And you're everything I can't stop thinking about." The peaceful house protected them from the repercussions of their actions, and the kitchen became their sanctuary. There was an electric connection between them that neither of them could deny. Every touch, every word murmured. The sound of a door creaking open broke the moment just as their passion peaked. As Ethan emerged in the doorway with an unreadable expression, Olivia withdrew, her heart pounding. "What's happening here?" Ethan's eyes darted between them as he spoke sharply. Aaron took a step forward, his voice solid, yet his stance relaxed. Ethan, Don't, Ethan cut in, his voice icy. This has to end now, whatever it is. As Ethan turned and left, leaving Olivia and Aaron standing in startled stillness, Olivia's gut churned. Aaron reached for her hand as the house fell silent again, his hold tight but reassuring. We'll work this out, he murmured quietly. Olivia's chest constricted as she nodded. But what if we are unable to? We will, he said, maintaining a steady gaze. Because I'm not going to leave this alone. They both understood that they had crossed a line that could never be reversed, and the repercussions were only getting started, regardless of what the future contained. An intolerable tension pervaded every part of the house in the hours after Ethan's sudden discovery. Olivia slept very little since she kept thinking about the incident. She would never forget the mixture of betrayal and disbelief on Ethan's face. In an attempt to be away from everyone, she remained in her room until dawn arrived. However, her stomach rumbled as the aroma of coffee filled the air, telling her that she couldn't hide forever. The atmosphere downstairs was oppressive. Ethan sat at the table with a chilly, aloof look. With a cup of coffee in hand and a composed expression, Aaron was leaning on the counter with his jaw clenched. As she entered the room, Olivia paused in the doorway, sensing the pressure of their stares. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper when she muttered, "Good morning." Ethan remained silent, staring at his phone. However, Aaron approached her with a calm, comforting demeanor. "Is it possible for us to speak?" Aaron asked in a low voice that was only intended for her to hear. Olivia looked at Ethan, who didn't raise his head, and nodded. The cold morning air outside contrasted sharply with the oppressive tension inside, as Aaron took her out to the back patio. Before he spoke, they stood still for a moment. In a soft voice, he inquired, "Are you okay?" Her chest constricted as she glanced up at him. "I'm not sure." Ethan regarded me as though I were a complete stranger. Warm and reassuring, Aaron grabbed for her hand. "He'll change his mind," he stated firmly. "He's simply taken aback. This is difficult for all of us." Olivia nodded, but she was still unsure. What happens if he doesn't? What if everything is destroyed by this? Aaron took a step forward, his eyes unwavering. "It won't. Whatever happens, we will work it out together." There was strained silence for the remainder of the day. Ethan stayed away from them both, withdrawing into his room or vanishing into the garage. Olivia was deeply troubled by his absence, and every hour that went by made her feel more guilty. By nightfall, she was at her breaking point. Her heart was racing when she knocked on Ethan's door. "Enter," he urged bluntly. Her stomach turned when she entered and saw him sitting on the edge of his bed with a reserved expression. Her voice was shaking as she said, "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never intended to cause you harm." His eyes were chilly as he gazed at her. "Olivia, you did more than simply cause me pain. You caught me off guard. Aaron was meant to be my closest buddy, but now—" He shook his head and walked away. "I am at a loss for what to think." Tears filled her eyes as she swallowed forcefully. "It wasn't organized. It simply happened." His tone was stern as he replied, "That's not an excuse." "I understand," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "But that's the reality." Olivia couldn't sleep that night and ended up in the living room as the house fell into its typical silence. She sat curled up on the couch, thinking, while the flickering shadows on the walls were created by the fireplace's brightness. Aaron was standing in the doorway when she heard footsteps behind her. He simply walked across the room and sat next to her without saying anything. After a time, he said, "I spoke with Ethan." Her heart leaped. And Aaron acknowledged that he was upset. However, he will not speak to anybody else. All he needs is time. She felt a feeling of relief, but it was soon followed by another wave of guilt. "I detest how everything is being torn apart by this." Aaron's fingers entwined with hers as he reached for her hand. He whispered, "This doesn't have to be the end of anything. We can find a method to proceed." He drew in before she could react, his lips meeting hers in a slow, purposeful kiss that was full of all the feelings they had been fighting to keep to themselves. The sound of a throat clearing cut short their encounter. With a sudden separation, they turned to discover Ethan standing in the doorway with an enigmatic look. Olivia said in a shaky voice, "Ethan." He silenced her with a raised hand. "Save it," he remarked in a cold tone. "All I needed was water." Olivia's chest constricted as he vanished into the kitchen. Her voice was panicked as she turned to Aaron. "What happens if he has second thoughts? What happens if he tells?" Aaron had a composed yet serious look on his face. "He won't," he declared with assurance. "But we'll handle it even if he does. Together." Olivia couldn't get rid of the feeling that their secret was getting out of hand and that the repercussions would not be over as the night wore on. As the clock struck midnight, the entire house fell silent. Olivia's mind was racing as she laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible because of the combination of Aaron's reassuring words, Ethan's icy demeanor, and her own guilt. The heart skipped when she heard a gentle knock on the door. The door cracked open, and she sat up, gasping for air. Aaron entered and silently shut the door behind him. Her voice was shaking as she muttered, "What are you doing?" His voice was low and urgent as he said, "I needed to see you. Olivia, you are always on my mind. I'm not going to act like this never happened." As he came closer, his presence filled the room, and her heart sped. "This is risky, Aaron. If Ethan discovers..." His tone was calm yet firm as he interrupted, "He already knows. And this is already the case. Now, there is no turning back." His gaze searched hers as he sat on the side of her bed. "I'll leave if you tell me to. But don't push me away if you share my feelings." Olivia was having trouble finding her voice, and her breath caught. She was aware that she needed to send him away in order to stop this crazy from getting worse. However, it was impossible due to the intensity of his gaze and the warmth of his palm when it touched hers. Her voice was shaking as she whispered, "I hate that you make this so hard." In an emotionally charged tone, he answered, "And I hate that I can't stop wanting you." Aaron leaned in before she could react, planting a deep, purposeful kiss on her lips that was full of all the feelings they had been battling for weeks. Their inhibition broke down as the kiss grew deeper. Olivia's fingers became caught in Aaron's hair as his hands moved to her waist, drawing her in. There was no time for uncertainty or indecision as the tension that had been growing between them exploded. Her voice was tremulous as she muttered, "You're impossible," against his lips. With his breath warm against her skin, he answered, "And you're unforgettable." As they gave in to the connection they could no longer ignore, the silence of the home enveloped them like a cocoon. Both of them were unable to resist the hazardous mixture of passion and need that permeated every touch and every word that was murmured. Olivia stirred as the first rays of daylight peeked through the curtains, the weight of what they had done pressing down on her heart. Aaron was sitting on the side of the bed, looking calm but serious, when she turned around. He whispered, "We need to talk." Footsteps rang out from the corridor before she could reply. Ethan stood with his face unreadable as her door cracked open. "I figured," Ethan answered in a dry voice, but there was a mixture of hurt and rage in his eyes. "There is no way you could wait a day, is there?" Aaron stood, speaking in a calm but forceful tone, and Olivia's chest constricted. "This isn't about you, Ethan. It concerns us." "Us?" Ethan laughed bitterly, and his voice cracked. "What do you think this is about, US? You are betraying all of our rules and confidence." Aaron acknowledged in a firm voice, "I know. I apologize as well. However, I won't abandon her." Ethan's demeanor softened as he turned to face Olivia. He replied softly, "You're making a mistake," and turned to leave. Olivia breathed shakily as the door snapped shut, her hands shaking. "This is a catastrophe," she said. With a firm and comforting grip, Aaron drew her into his arms. "Perhaps," he muttered. "I don't regret it, though. Not for a moment." Olivia couldn't get rid of the sensation that this was just the beginning as the morning went on. One thing was certain. They couldn't change what had happened, and neither of them wanted to. The repercussions of their decisions hung over them like a hurricane.